Adventure to Cosmic. I'm Cosmic, and we are on part 3 of Dead Tide. We left off at chapter 20. We are at the end of chapter 20. We have chapter 21 to do. And before we get started, let's show this so I don't get my video taken away. This is the email. If you want YouTube, you can pause it and look at it. Okay, so we're going to be starting at chapter 21. If you haven't seen my last video, go ahead and check that out. If you haven't seen the video before, I suggest you also go check that one out. Okay? Have fun. Enjoy your life. And if you want to, grab yourself a cup of tea, cup of coffee, cup of hot chocolate, some sort of warm beverage that you like, and enjoy this. Because let's get back into Blackmore Sisters. Oh, whoops. Sorry, guys. Sorry for that little spoiler. That never happened. Okay.
Chapter 21. She certainly didn't need Cal Reed to help her decipher an old journal, Celeste thought, as she leafed through the old book, looking for poem-shaped passages. Surely, she and her sisters could figure out how to look up the code. It seemed simple enough. 2 hours later, she hadn't found one other poem-like entry when Fiona and Morgan came home. "How's your wrist?" Fiona sat beside her, holding out her hand for Celeste's cast-wrapped wrist. "It's pretty good. Actually, it doesn't even hurt at all." She submitted to Fiona's tapping and poking. Fiona slid a ruby-nailed finger into the gap between the palm of her hand and the cast and pulled the carnelian out. "So, this did the trick then?" "I think so. I don't know if it's healed, but it doesn't hurt anymore." "Oh, it's probably all healed by now. You should go back to the doctor and have that thing removed." Celeste rolled her eyes. "Yeah, I can picture the look on his face when I tell him my sister put a rock in the cast, and I'm certain it must have healed my broken wrist." Fiona and Morgan laughed. "Well, maybe you should wait the appropriate amount of time just to save from having to explain," Morgan suggested. "So, what's going on? Where's Cal? I thought he and Jolene were deciphering the journal." Fiona sat down next to Celeste to look at the items spread on the table. "They were, but they both had to leave, so I figured I might as well give it a go." "Did he find anything?" Morgan asked. "Earlier, when Cal was here, we deciphered this strange poem." Celeste pointed to the poem he had written down on a piece of paper. Cal was wondering if the 2 maps part might mean that there was another map, and thought the leather map would be a good candidate, because hide is another word for leather. "So, how do you use 2 maps to get to a treasure?" Fiona asked. Celeste explained Cal's theory of one map showing the way through the maze, and the other being the directions to where the treasure is buried. Morgan stood beside the coffee table, frowning down at the poem. Treacherous maze. That's ominous. "What do you think makes the maze treacherous?" Celeste shrugged. "Who knows?" "This is all great and everything," Fiona said, "but it still doesn't tell us where the maze is." Celeste puffed out her cheeks. "I know. And there's no other passages that look like poems. We're going to have to go through the whole book until we hit the part that tells where the maze is." Morgan reached down and thumbed the pages. "It's a pretty big book. What if the part we need isn't obvious? I'm sure it doesn't come right out and say, The maze with the treasures in it is located 20 degrees east of the opening to the channel, or anything like that. Well, we have to do something, Celeste said. The low tide is tomorrow night. Right. I'm beginning to think we should just wait for the pirates and then follow them, Fiona suggested. Luke said he got the geological map of the area and didn't see anything that looked like it would be exposed by the low tide, Morgan said. But he did say one thing was odd. Someone else had requested a geological map of the same exact area. The pirates? Maybe, Morgan shrugged. And now that Overton is going to give them the map, they'll know where the maze is and think they know how to navigate it to get to the treasure. So,
They actually
there's
do.
no need for them to come after us. Maybe, maybe not. Either way, I don't want them taking our treasure. Not after everything we've been through. Me either, Celeste said. So, we only have two choices. Follow them or figure out where it is ourselves. And since we really don't have much else to do, we might as well work on figuring it out, Fiona said, pulling the journal over to her side of the table. The girls worked on the journal in silence, each taking turns reading the words, while another person flipped around in the poetry book to decode the word. After several hours, Celeste's headache was back, and they'd only come up with mundane accounts of daily life as a 1700s sailor. Hey, where do you think the map of the maze came from, anyway? Morgan looked up from the poetry book. I mean, I know Mateo put it in Jolene's pocket, but where did he get it from? I assume from Skinner or his office, Fiona shrugged. Okay, so then where did Skinner get it from? There's no drawing of a maze in the journal. Fiona pulled the maze drawing in front of her on the table. Well, it's not an old drawing. So it's either a copy of an old drawing that someone drew themselves, or maybe the journal describes the map and Skinner drew it according to the instructions. Or Mateo got it through some other source, Celeste offered. Morgan pressed her lips together. Maybe we should be looking in the journal for something that is more like instructions or directions. If Isaiah Blackmore wrote down instructions on how to draw the map, he probably would have something about where the maze is located, near them. Good idea, Fiona agreed. Celeste thought it was a good idea too, but her head was pounding, and her eyelids grew heavy. She stifled a yawn. I'm really beat. I might go lay down. You should. Fiona raised concerned eyes at her. You're still recovering from that bash on the head. You need a lot of rest. Yeah, and you'll need to be in tip-top shape for tomorrow, Morgan added, causing Celeste's stomach to crunch. Right, to fight off pirates and recover treasure, Celeste said. Cal said he was coming back, but that was hours ago, so I don't know if he's going to show or not. Where did he go? He said he had a meeting, Celeste answered. Probably with Camilla, she thought to herself, then felt an uncustomary surge of anger. He couldn't even hurry back for something this important? The anger was immediately replaced by guilt. It was her own fault he was with Camilla, and not with her. Suddenly, she felt very weary. She was overtired, and needed to go to bed. Maybe tomorrow this wouldn't bother her so much. Okay, well, I'm headed off to bed. She got up from the sofa and shuffled out of the room. Take some Tylenol PM, so you get a good rest, Morgan called after her. Good idea. She veered into the kitchen and grabbed a couple of pills from the drawer. Glancing out the window at the ocean, she felt herself shiver. After tomorrow night, things might never be the same. Chapter 22. Sheriff Dwight Overton studied the map he'd taken from the Blackmore residence. Those Blackmore bimbos didn't pick a very good hiding spot, he said into the empty room, congratulating himself on his cleverness. He bent over his rickety kitchen table, squinting in the low light from the 45-watt bulb that hung overhead. His small apartment contained only the bare necessities. No Quit was merely a temporary stop in his grand plan, so he hadn't bothered to spend any time or money on furnishings. It wouldn't be long before he was out of here and living in more luxurious accommodations. The floorboards creaked as he crossed to the kitchen drawer. He pulled it open, rummaging inside for a pen that matched the ink on the map exactly. He sat down at the table and set about drawing a replica of the map. Almost an exact replica, except for a few key changes, like the directions on how to navigate through the maze. He carefully traced the outline, his tongue sticking out of the side of his mouth, his hand shaking just slightly. He omitted some of the actual dead ends and put in a few of his own before drawing the path that indicated which way to go to get the treasure. The path he drew wasn't the same as the path on the map he had, of course. It was almost the exact opposite. He finished the final line with a flourish and leaned back in the simple wooden chair he'd picked up for $1 at a yard sale, a smile spreading across his face. He didn't smile often, but this was cause for celebration. His years of hard work were finally about to pay off. He folded the map carefully and put it in a plain white envelope inside a paper bag. Later on tonight, he'd drop it off at the designated spot where one of Goldlinger's lackeys would pick it up. The thought of Goldlinger made his bowels cramp. Overton shuddered to think what the man would do to him if he found out the map was a fake. But Overton was smart. He'd planned things to the letter. By the time Goldlinger figured out he'd been double-crossed, Overton would be miles away, using a different name. Plus, if he was lucky, the Blackmores and that meddling Luke Hunter would have taken care of most of Goldlinger's henchmen for him and weakened Goldlinger's operation, so he'd have no resources left to chase Overton. His smile turned into a smirk as he thought about the lucky break he'd gotten when Goldlinger sent him here to investigate the death of the Blackmore girl's mother. To make sure, it was ruled a suicide. Goldlinger had pulled a lot of strings to get Overton in place there, and he'd known there was more to it than just fixing a death investigation. It had taken 4 long years to get to this point. Even though the small-town sheriff's position was boring and demeaning, there had been some things he'd enjoyed, like putting the screws to the Blackmore sisters. He'd hated the Blackmores on sight and delighted in making them miserable, serving them with trumped-up citations, finagling evidence, and paying off judges so he could throw them in jail. In fact, he would have loved to have thrown a couple of them in jail for Skinner's murder, but he didn't have the time to rig up the evidence. He had much more important things to focus on now. Overton folded the real map and put it in his top shirt pocket.
Or so he thought.
He'd keep it close, where no one could take it from him. He wanted to know exactly where it was, because it was critical he have it on hand tomorrow night when the tide was its lowest. He turned around and reached out to open the drawer of a small side table he had against the wall. His heartbeat quickened with excitement as he pulled out a piece of paper and spread it out on the table. The paper was a geographical contour map of Noquit, which showed a specific spot. A spot that Overton was sure Goldlinger didn't know about. A secret tunnel of sorts that opened just at the channel that led into Perkins Cove. It was covered by water now, but during the lowest tide, he'd be able to gain access. According to his calculations, he'd be able to start his journey toward the maze about 2 hours before dead tide. That would give him an hour to get in, grab all the treasure he could, and get out before the ebb tide submerged the treasure for another 300 years. And all the while, Goldlinger's men would be wandering around, lost in the maze. Overton laughed out loud as he shoved himself away from the table. Grabbing his sheriff's hat, he shoved it on his head and started on the way to his mundane job at the police station. For the last time ever. After years of patiently waiting, he was finally going to get exactly what he deserved.
Yeah, sure.
Chapter 23. 13 hours until dead tide. Celeste had stared at the journal for so long that it felt like an image of the pages would be burned into her retinas. Disappointment pressed on her like a weight. Only 13 hours until dead tide, and they still had no idea where the maze was. She looked out the window at the Atlantic. The first low tide of the day would be in about a half hour, just shortly before noon. But that wouldn't be the lowest tide of the day. That tide would come tonight at almost exactly midnight. The water would be at the very lowest point. Dead tide. Luke and his men were still out on the ocean today, watching, even though they all agreed that the pirates would probably make their move at night, under the cover of darkness. They figured the pirates would make their way into the maze, wherever that was, shortly before midnight, so they could be in place when dead tide hit. They might only have a short period of time to recover the treasure before the tide started to come back in. Celeste could feel the tension in her shoulders. Maybe if she could figure out what the significance of low tide was, she could figure out where the maze was. Frustration gnawed at her. She had no idea where to start looking. Now would be a good time for her grandmother to appear and give her some sort of clue. But she hadn't. The tide really is a lot lower than I've ever seen it. Jolene had come into the room and was standing next to her at the window, pointing at the rocks that stood out from the ocean. Yeah, that rock there is usually only jutting out of the water at the very top. Now you can see a whole crop of rocks below it. But no maze, huh? Morgan said from the other side of the room. Celeste turned and her stomach grumbled at the tray of grapes, cheese, and crackers Morgan had in her hand. Fiona came in with a pitcher of lemonade, and they all sat down on the overstuffed chairs, being careful not to get the food or drinks near the journal. Celeste noticed Fiona was wearing a new necklace in place of the malachite one that had exploded. This one was a big blue stone, the aquamarine she and Cal had found in the attic. Fiona caught her looking, and her hand flew up to the stone. I figured I'd wear it, since my other one shattered, and, well, it seems appropriate. You guys don't mind, do you? Of course not, Celeste answered for all of them. Though, with the way the malachite one helped us beat those pirates, maybe you should be wearing another one of those. Fiona laughed. I should have made one for all of us. I did, however, bring that satchel of crystals we found in the attic last summer. She pointed to a burlap bag that was laying on the floor. Celeste recognized it as one they had found in the attic during the big treasure hunt in the summer. It had the initials MB on it, which they thought might stand for Mariah Blackmore, the wife of Isaiah Blackmore. The sack contained a variety of large crystals. The girls found it interesting that an ancestor apparently had the same affinity for them as Fiona. "Why did you bring those?" Celeste's brows mashed together as she opened the flap to look inside. "Morgan told me to. She had a feeling." Fiona looked at Morgan. "And we all know we should pay attention to those now." Belladonna appeared out of nowhere and eyed the cheese expectantly. Celeste broke off a small piece, offering it to the cat, who sniffed it daintily for 2 full minutes before taking it. "So, what do we do now?" Jolene asked. "We finished deciphering the book," Fiona answered. "Cal was here until dawn, and we made it through a lot of the book," Jolene said, layering a slice of cheese on top of a saltine and crunching into it. "But we didn't find any clues about the maze yet." "He went home to catch up on some sleep. He's supposed to be here soon. Until then, we can still make progress ourselves." Morgan popped a grape into her mouth. Celeste caught herself wondering whose home Cal went to.
Oh?
"I just feel so useless sitting here. Shouldn't we be out there doing something?" Jolene gestured toward the window. "Well, Luke's men are on the ocean looking for the pirates to come by sea. Luke's taking the evening shift and will be out there himself tonight," Morgan said. "And more of Luke's guys are watching the house, along with Jake, just in case the pirates come here." An icy finger traced Celeste's spine. It seems odd that pirates hadn't made a move at them. But then again, if they have the map, they might think they have everything and not even bother with the girls. Still, she couldn't
They
help
do
but
have
feel
everything.
it was the calm before the storm. So Luke's out on the water, Jake's watching the house, and we're supposed to sit here and do what? The tone in Celeste's voice showed her frustration. "Hopefully find the answer to where the maze is," Jolene said. "Because I don't know about you, but I'm gonna be pissed if the pirates make off with a treasure that belongs to us." Meow. Belladonna jumped up onto Jolene's lap as if to say she agreed. Celeste rubbed her eyes and pulled the journal over toward her, steeling herself for a long afternoon of deciphering. "Okay, I guess we might as well get started. Which page did you leave off on?" Chapter 24. 1.5 hours until dead tide. Dwight Overton silently paddled the wooden dinghy from the dock in Perkins Cove toward the end of the channel. He wore a dark shirt and pants, hoping that no one would notice him gliding slowly under the bridge toward the mouth of the cove. Not that anyone was around to see him. It was past 10 p.m., and the cove was basically shut down for the night. The water glittered in the moonlight as it quietly lapped the edges of the cove. The rocks that had been built up to form the sides of the channel revealed how low the tide really was. There was a clear line where the water normally leveled off, and now it was a good 10 feet below that. Overton knew it would get even lower in the hours to come, but he wanted to get a head start. He'd need some time to locate the entrance. Glancing back in the boat behind him, he double-checked his supplies one last time. A shovel, buckets, and a wheeled dolly, everything he needed. The paddling was easy since the current did most of the work. As he neared the mouth of the channel, Overton took out the geological map. He'd marked it with longitude and latitude coordinates of the slight anomaly in the channel floor that he'd seen. Most people wouldn't have noticed, but Overton knew this anomaly wasn't natural. Something man-made was there, and he had a good idea who made it. The old pirate, Isaiah Blackmore. Glancing at his GPS watch, his heartbeat sped up as he checked his location. If his hunch was correct, the entrance to the maze was just to his left. He used the paddle to steer the dinghy to the side, which gradually sloped downwards toward the water, giving him a convenient place to park. He hopped out of the boat into water that was up to his knees. His breath rasped in his lungs as the frigid chill slapped him. His neoprene boot-clad feet were almost instantly numb, but he managed to shake off the cold and pull the boat up onto the side. He'd need it for his getaway later on. Hitching up his pants, he turned his attention to the rock-covered slope and searched for the indentation that he knew would be there. His heart kicked when he saw it right in front of him. He grabbed the shovel and started moving the rocks away. His shoulders ached with the strain of the heavy boulders. He wasn't used to this type of physical labor, but his excitement kept him going, especially when he saw the gaping hole the rocks revealed. The mouth of the passage into the maze. He quickly moved aside enough of the boulders to fit himself and his dolly inside. Then he disappeared into the darkness of the tunnel. Chapter 25. 55 minutes until dead tide. Celeste leaned back on the couch, stretching her arms up over her head, her neck cracking loudly at the effort. She glanced at the clock, her skin prickling with nerves. It was less than 1 hour until dead tide, and they still hadn't discovered where the treasure was. Who's hungry? Jolene lay stretched out on her back, on the other side of the informal living room. Belladonna was curled up on her stomach, the cat rising up and down every time Jolene took a breath. I am, Morgan answered. Me too, Fiona said. Ditto. Cal looked up from the journal with a sigh. Celeste rubbed her stomach. Despite her nerves, she did feel a little hungry. I could go for a pizza. Jolene rolled over, dislodging Belladonna, who protested with an angry meow. She grabbed her cell phone from the table. I have Gino's pizza on speed dial. What do you guys want? They decided on a large pepperoni. Jolene made the order, and they all leaned back in their chairs to take a break from the journal. Is anyone else getting worried that we haven't figured out where the maze is yet? I mean, it's less than an hour until the tide is its lowest, Fiona said. Celeste looked over at her. Was the very bottom of her aquamarine pendant glowing? Must be just a reflection from the bright full moon. It's frustrating, Morgan said. I think we should come up with a plan B. I don't know about a plan B, but one of us has to go pick up the pizza, Jolene said. I'll go, Cal volunteered. I could use the downtime to try to figure out what the tie-in is between the two maps. I feel like that could be a significant piece of the puzzle. He got up from the chair he was sitting in, waved off an offer of money from Morgan, and disappeared down the hall. Celeste's heart sank. He hadn't even looked over at her as he walked away. This journal deciphering is back-breaking work. Fiona stood and stretched out her back. It sure is, and straining to make out the writing is killing my eyes, Morgan added.
Sorry, guys.
Especially with Belladonna sticking her face into the book all day, Jolene said, petting the cat affectionately. Celeste felt the corners of her lips tug upwards in a smile. The cat had been a little disruptive all day, sticking her face in the journal as if she was trying to turn the pages. They'd had to shoo her away a few times because she'd caused them to lose their place in the book. Still, it was kind of cute that she wanted to be a part of it. We've been at this all day, and we haven't made any progress. Celeste looked out the picture window toward the ocean. Were the pirates out there, waiting to attack? Or would they just slip in, take the treasure, and leave? Usually, the light from the full moon reflecting off the tops of the waves was a calming scene. But tonight, she knew what might happen out there would be anything but calm. That's why I think we need another plan. We should prepare to meet those pirates head on. Let's let them lead us to the treasure, and then we'll take it from them, Morgan said. Fiona's forehead wrinkled. How would we battle a bunch of killer pirates? Well, we've done it before, Jolene pointed out. Celeste shrugged. Sure, maybe if our skills were more refined. But even then, if we tried that, Luke would have his men returning us to safety before we even set foot out of the house. Yeah, and Jake's out watching the house, making sure no one breaks in too, Fiona said. I'm sure he'd take a dim view of us seeking out the pirates. It's frustrating to sit here and wait for something to happen. Morgan paced the room, gnawing on a nail. Belladonna following back and forth at her heels. Or for the pizza to show up, Jolene joked. Celeste picked up the poetry book. The book was the key to deciphering the journal, but it was also just a regular book. She wondered why Isaiah Blackmore had chosen it as the cipher key. Thumbing through the old book, she breathed in the musty smell of old paper. She'd always liked that smell, for some reason. The pages were brittle, and she thumbed them carefully, stopping to look at some of the black and white illustrations on the pages. Hey, let's take a break and read some of these poems while we're waiting for the pizza. Just for fun, Jolene said. Celeste shrugged, opening the book to the first page. Sure, why not? Fiona sat down opposite Celeste, and Celeste couldn't help but notice the aquamarine pendant. It was glowing, just at the very bottom, and if her mind wasn't playing tricks on her, the glow was getting brighter. Chapter 26. 50 minutes until dead tide.
Oh, God.
Overton sloshed through the knee-high water, his breath coming in ragged gasps from the exertion. He could hardly feel his feet anymore. The water was like ice. Once the tide receded fully, the entire tunnel would be dry, but he wanted to get to the treasure as quickly as possible to ensure he could get out before the incoming tide filled the tunnel entirely and trapped him inside, sentencing him to a watery death. He stumbled ahead on wooden feet, pulling the dolly under the water awkwardly behind him. The sharp, salty smell of the sea permeated his nostrils. The tunnel was dank and slimy. He slipped a few times, but that didn't deter him from his quest. His flashlight illuminated garlands of seaweed and starfish that clung to the tunnel walls. Flashing it ahead of him, his heart jerked when he saw a solid wall. He could go either left or right. Which way? He took the map from his top pocket, where he'd stored it in a Ziploc bag so it wouldn't get wet. Drying his fingers thoroughly, he removed the paper from the bag and studied it. He thought he was at the west entrance, but if he was, there should be no wall here. He turned the map 180 degrees and found it matched where he was better. The map indicated to go to the left, which he did. Another 10 or 20 feet, and he felt the water level getting lower with each step. He didn't think it was the tide. Too drastic of a drop for that. It felt like he was going uphill. He frowned down at the map. Shouldn't he be going downhill, below sea level? According to the map, he should go straight, turn left through an opening a little ways up, and then left again. He followed it obediently, except there was no second left. He could only go right after the opening. Overton felt seeds of doubt take root in his belly. Was the map even right? Maybe he had taken a wrong turn? He studied the map, turning it this way and that, trying to make out exactly where he was. He couldn't be lost. He planned everything so carefully. Getting lost inside this dark, smelly maze was not an option. He shrugged and continued forward, since it was the only path to take. Surely the maze couldn't be so complicated that he couldn't figure out how to navigate it to the treasure. Dragging the dolly forward, he felt a spark of hope when he noticed the path was getting wider. He quickened his pace. He was nearly there. He could feel it.
And he's wrong.
The floor of the maze was damp, with shallow puddles here and there. Overton could hear his boots crunching on the few unfortunate snails that had clung onto the rock floor instead of going out with the tide. He turned into a narrow opening in the wall. He was going on instinct now, not even following the map, but he felt like he was heading in the right direction. His breath caught in his throat when he saw the remnants of what he was seeking. A sea chest lay open against the wall. It was empty, its edges sagging, the wood rotted from years of exposure, but proof nonetheless that the treasure was near. Shining the light in the passage ahead of him, his heart leapt when he saw a gaping hole in the passage floor in front of him. He crossed to the edge, shining his flashlight down into what looked like a black, bottomless pit. Two weathered boards lay next to each other as a bridge to cross to the other side. Overton eyed them dubiously, but then his flashlight caught several glints of light from the other side of the path. He angled the flashlight, craning his neck to see what it was. Gold coins. He rushed on ahead, his skepticism about the sturdiness of the boards overruled by his greed. The old boards groaned as he stepped on them, causing his heart to twist. The gap was only about 4 feet, and Overton figured he could make it in 2 or 3 long steps. He stretched out his right leg and placed it further on the board, his heart stopping when the board bowed under his weight. It held. He put his full weight on the right foot, lifting the left and moving it along the left board. That board bowed too, but he was almost to the other side. He lifted his right leg to repeat the process. Snap. The board gave way, and Overton felt the sickening sensation of weightlessness before he fell. His arms grappled out by instinct, catching on the other board and stopping him short with an abrupt jerk that practically pulled his arms out of the sockets. The flashlight which he had dropped had miraculously landed on the board. It cast an eerie light on the passage. Fear clutched at his chest as he looked down at his legs dangling in the open space below. Sweat dripped from his brow. He struggled to lift himself up onto the one remaining board, but his weight was too much for him. He looked around the passage, his stomach sinking when he realized the only other people down here would be Goldlinger's men. If they found him down here, they'd know he was trying to get the treasure for himself, and that would mean certain death. Chapter 27. 45 minutes until dead tide. Belladonna flicked her tail against the coffee table, trying to draw attention to the 2 maps that lay spread on the surface. But the sisters paid no attention to her, preferring to ooh and ah at the sappy love poems in the old poetry book. She sighed in exasperation, flopped down on her belly, and licked the inside of her paw. Sometimes it was so hard to get through to the humans. She wondered why she even bothered. She'd spent most of the day trying to point out the very page in the journal they should look at, but they paid no attention, even going so far as to shoo her away. She felt the hairs on her back prickle and sat upright, becoming alert to the energy in the house. Something was happening below, something that needed her attention. She slipped out of the living room and into the kitchen, pausing at the rope-covered scratching post her humans had conveniently installed in the pantry, and took a few seconds to hone her claws to needle-like points. She would need them to be as sharp and deadly as possible. She trotted over to the basement door and stood on her hind legs, her front paws twisting the knob and pulling the door open. Then she used her nose to push it open wide enough so that her slim body could slip through. She trotted down the stairs, turned right, and slipped through the crack behind the cask and into the darkness. It didn't take long for her cat's eyes to become used to the absence of light, and soon she could see just as good as any human with a flashlight. But she didn't really need her eyesight. She followed her instincts. Trotting down the twisting corridors, her calloused paws barely even registered the damp coolness of the floor as she closed in on her quarry. Less than a minute later, she saw the light, like a beacon in the dark, drawing her toward her destination. She picked up the pace, her paws silently slapping on the wet rock. She turned a corner, and her whiskers tingled at the sight in front of her. Sheriff Overton was hanging over a precipice, clutching onto a weathered plank, a flashlight sitting precariously on the edge next to him. She sniffed the air, her nose turning up at the foul stench of human fear. She padded over to the board, sitting just on the very end, and stared at him, flicking her tail over the edge, out into the precipice. Hi, kitty. Nice kitty. Overton's eyes were
You're right next to my human, so I'm not gonna be next to you.
To a rope that was tied to the wall. Get the rope. He nodded his head in the direction of the rope. Belladonna made a big show of going over to the rope and rubbing against it. Why not have some fun? Yes, good kitty, he crooned. Bring it here, and I'll give you a treat. Meow. Belladonna picked up the rope with her teeth and looked at him tentatively. Yes, that's right. He gestured with his hand for her to come toward him. She took a few steps toward him, noting the hopeful look in his eye. She stared at him for a few heartbeats, then dropped the rope. His eyes turned cold and hard. She continued toward him, walking out onto the plank, but staying far enough away so he couldn't grab her and send her over the edge. Her heartbeat drummed in her ears, her whiskers twitching with heightened awareness. Get the rope, you damn cat! His voice was hard and rough. Belladonna might have felt sorry for him if she didn't see the evil malice in his eyes. She thought back to all the things he'd done to her humans, and her stomach curdled. She inched closer, her highly developed senses knowing just how far away she should stay. Then, in a burst of energy, she shot out her paw. Her claws shot out like switchblades, and she raked them across the back of his hand.
Yes!
Ouch! He jerked his hand away, which also loosened his grip on the board. He dangled precariously by one hand, the other grappling for the board again. But Belladonna was too fast for him. Her paw shot out again, alternatively scratching his other hand, and then slipping under the side of the board to pry his fingers. She saw his hand loosen its grip. Overton was holding on only by the tips of his fingers now. She watched dispassionately as he flailed wildly, trying to regain his grip on the board. She could have moved in for the kill and forced his fingers off, but she knew he wouldn't be able to support his weight for long. She saw one finger slip off, then another, and finally his whole hand slid off the board and into the darkness below. No! His scream echoed in the passage. Then a loud splash. She looked down into the hole ruefully. She took no pleasure in killing humans. Mice, on the other hand, were a whole different story, she thought, eyeing a juicy brown field mouse as it scurried around a corner. She tore her gaze away and leapt off the board to the safety of solid ground. She didn't have time to track down the mouse, and besides, her humans never appreciated the warm, fur-covered offerings of mice bodies she left for them after devouring the delicious heads. She trotted off the way she had come, glancing back once over her shoulder at the gaping hole. She wondered if a human could survive the long fall and plunge into the icy ocean waters. Unlikely, she thought. She didn't have much time to ponder it, though. She needed to get back to her humans. Her keen senses told her tonight would be extraordinary, and they may need her services for even more important matters.
You damn cat.
Chapter 28. 40 minutes until dead tide. Luke sat in the Bayliner cruiser, his binoculars in hand. The rocking motion of the boat did nothing to soothe his nerves. The tide was running out quickly now, and so was his time. The bad guys would be here in a minute. Buzz turned on the motor and moved the boat forward a few feet. The pull of the tide was making it difficult for the anchor to keep the small boat in place. Luke put the binoculars up to his face and continued his vigilant watch, alternating his focus between the open ocean and the Blackmore house. He felt his shoulders knotting up with tension. He had no idea where these pirates were going to come from. His instincts told him they would come up the coast by boat, but he wasn't sure if they'd be coming from the north or the south. He positioned the boat in a spot where he could easily watch both sides. But he couldn't take a risk they'd attack the Blackmore house again, like they had during the summer. So he had men stationed all around the area, ready to assist at the house or in the water at a moment's notice. He scanned the yard with his binoculars, moving them slowly from the point of the cliff in the back to the front of the house, just to make sure no pirates were near the house. The girls were inside. His stomach clenched, thinking about what happened during the summer. He'd never forgive himself if something happened to Morgan and he wasn't there to protect her.
Aww.
Luke tapped the button on his
Where the hell is Cal? Defeat them!
Scott, do you see anything up by the house? He said into the mouthpiece clipped to his lapel. Not a peep. The voice came through his earpiece. Nothing out there either, Buzz said from the front of the boat, where he had his binoculars trained toward the open ocean. You'd think they'd be here by now. Luke nodded, a feeling of dread spreading inside his chest. He pointed his binoculars at the cliff on the edge of the channel that led into Perkins Cove. The treasure could be right inside that channel, he said. Or, over on the opposite side, Buzz pointed to the other side of the channel. Well, heck, I guess it could be anywhere, Luke said. He studied the cliff with his binoculars. The hole from the explosion last summer stuck out like a sore thumb. Following the cliff line, he noticed the opening at the mouth of the cave they'd explored on their dive the other day was sticking out above the waterline. It was big enough to drive a small boat in. Luke nudged Buzz with his elbow. Check out that cave we saw underwater the other day. You can almost drive a boat right into the opening. Buzz aimed his binoculars in the direction Luke indicated. Yeah, when the tide is fully out, you will be able to drive a boat in there. Luke saw a metallic reflection, and his heart stopped. What's that? What? I thought I saw something over by the cave. He squinted into his binoculars, his nerves tense. And then he saw it again, a metal glint. I see it, Buzz said. Luke's heart sank when he realized what it was. A scuba diver. And he was inflating a small boat, complete with motor. It's the pirates. Luke threw down his binoculars and ran to the wheel. Pull up the anchor. They're scuba diving in, and they have an inflatable. We need to follow them into the cave. Buzz ran over to the anchor, pressing the switch for the motor. Luke tapped his fingers on the steering wheel, cursing the anchor motor for its slowness. When he saw the anchor was almost up, he gunned the engine, taking the boat across the quarter-mile of ocean as fast as it would go. Celeste looked up from reading the poetry book. Jolene seemed disinterested, but Morgan and Fiona had dreamy looks on their faces. Those poems are so romantic, Fiona sighed. Do you think that's why Isaiah picked this book as the cipher key? Morgan asked. Maybe. Did you see the front of the book? Fiona grabbed the book from Celeste and turned to the very first page. Inside was an inscription in pen. To my love, M.B. from I.B.
Aww.
I bet Isaiah gave the book to his wife, Mariah, Morgan said. They must have had a great relationship, Celeste added. Could she and Cal have the same kind of relationship? Or was it too late? Morgan tilted her head to the side and scrunched up her face. Did you guys hear something? No, they answered at the same time. What did you hear? Fiona asked. Morgan shook her head. Oh, nothing. But Celeste noticed she still had a strange look on her face. Meow. Belladonna announced her arrival, and Celeste looked over at the cat. Oh, it was probably the cat you heard. Belladonna jumped up on Celeste's lap, and the smell of must tickled her nose. Celeste reached out to pet her, and her fur was damp. Oh, Belladonna, you're all wet. And dirty, Jolene noted. Have you been in the basement catching mice again? Fiona asked. Belladonna answered them by curling into a ball in Celeste's lap, staring at them and blinking her eyes lazily before narrowing them into pre-slumber slits. Fiona closed the poetry book and put it on the table. It's so sweet how he gave her this book and carved their initials in the tree, she said, referring to an old oak tree that towered over their shop, sticks and stones. The land that the shop sat on had been in their family since Isaiah's time, and someone had carved a heart with the initials I.B. and M.B. in it long ago. So long ago that the tree had grown and the initials were now 20 feet up. Naturally, the girls assumed it was Isaiah and Mariah. Earlier in the summer, they'd followed a trail of clues that they thought led to a treasure. One of those clues was a note they found in a silver box they dug up. You'll find the key you seek. Beneath the tree, we vowed our love. That note had led them to the tree with the initials where they dug up a key that ended up being the key that opened the box the leather treasure map was in. Celeste pressed her lips together. It's almost as if Isaiah was leaving these clues for Mariah. That's what I was just thinking, Morgan said. Remember the other clue about the key? That was written just for her because it said, the tree we vowed our love. And who else would know which tree that was besides Mariah? He probably wanted her to be able to get to his treasure if something happened to him, Jolene added. I just wish he didn't have to be so cryptic about it. Celeste glanced at the clock, her stomach sinking. It's almost dead tide, and we still have no clue where the treasure is. Jolene snapped her fingers. Wait a minute. The three sisters and Belladonna all swiveled their heads toward her. What? Morgan asked. Jolene stood and crossed over to the table that sat under the window. She reached into the long silver box that had held the leather map and pulled out the note they'd found in the lining. I think we might have interpreted this wrong. Jolene held the note up to face them. Fiona scrunched up her face. How so? Well, see how it says, "The ocean's revenge lies below my love"? Jolene pointed to the second line in the poem. Yeah? We were interpreting that to mean it lies below the sea, because the first line says the sea is my love. Right. Morgan's eyebrows raised a fraction of an inch. Well, in the book, he calls Mariah my love. What if the my love actually refers to Mariah, and the poem means the ocean's revenge is below Mariah? What would that mean? How could it be below her? Fiona scrunched up her face at Jolene. Well, it's kind of cryptic, but where would you find Mariah most of the time when she was alive? Right here, in the house he built for her, Morgan answered. Celeste's heart skipped. It was all making sense now. Grandma's ghost told me not to take things too literally, and what we seek might be right underfoot. At the time, I thought she was just being vague, but what if she literally meant underfoot? You mean under the house? But where? The basement is pretty much empty, Morgan said. Celeste looked down at the floor. She remembered her trip to the basement and how the pirate ghost had been swirling around that big cask, trying to pull her behind it. She shot out of her chair, causing Belladonna to fall to the floor with a thudding meow. There might be more to the basement than we realize. Follow me. Celeste turned toward the kitchen.
Please do tell.
Wait, Morgan said. She glanced down at the crystals that lay in the burlap sack at Fiona's feet. Bring those. I have a feeling they might come in handy. Fiona grabbed the sack. Then they all raced into the kitchen, hesitating only a second when they saw the basement door already open. Celeste flipped the switch for the basement light and took the stairs 2 at a time. Stopping in front of the cask, she turned to face her sisters. I heard Belladonna crying down here the other day, and when I came down to rescue her, I saw a ghost over here. Jolene leaned over to inspect the side of the cask where Celeste was pointing. It seemed like he wanted me to go behind the cask, Celeste added. Maybe there is a passageway back there, Fiona said. Celeste stared at Fiona's chest. The entire aquamarine pendant was glowing, a soft, warm glow. What? Fiona narrowed her eyes and looked at her other sisters, who were also staring at her chest. Why are you guys staring at me like that? Jolene pointed to the pendant. Your necklace, it's glowing. I thought I saw the bottom of it glowing upstairs, but figured it was just a trick of the light. But now, well, it's clearly glowing, Morgan said, reaffirming what Celeste thought she had seen. Fiona looked down. Well, that makes perfect sense. Aquamarine protects those who journey by sea. I bet the passage leads us down to the sea. Okay, so how do we get into this passage? Jolene craned her neck around the cask, feeling the wall behind it. I have no idea. Celeste joined her, and they pushed at the cask, hoping to move it aside, but it wouldn't budge. Maybe there's an easier way. Morgan stepped to the front of the cask and put her palms on it. Closing her eyes, she felt around the front, pressing and pushing. Then she smiled and nodded, her fingertips pressing in on a copper rivet. With a click, the front of the cask swung open to reveal a passage. The girls slipped inside, the glow from Fiona's pendant lighting their way. Cal drummed his fingers impatiently against the counter at Gino's Pizza while he waited for his order. Large pepperoni? The red-aproned blonde smiled up at him from beneath her navy blue baseball cap. Cal eyed the box suspiciously. He'd gotten the wrong pizza from Gino's more than once. He reached out to pry the top off, except it wouldn't open. He took it in both hands and tried to force it, pinching at the corner on the bottom and pulling at the cover. Sorry, those covers can be a pain. It's almost like they're booby-trapped or something, the girl said apologetically as she reached out to help him. Booby-trapped. The words zinged in his mind, and suddenly he knew the significance of the two maps. He grabbed his keys and ran for his car.
Damn, yeah, Cal!
Hey, mister, don't you want your pizza? The stunned girl at the counter yelled after him. Cal broke all the speed limits on his way to the block.
Damn, man!
If the girls, Luke, or Jake found out where the maze was and tried to go in without those two maps, the consequences could be deadly. The thought of something happening to any of them, especially Celeste, turned his insides cold.
Aww.
He squealed to a stop in front of the house.
Well, now we
ran
know
up the steps,
Cal
and
loves
jerked the
Celeste,
door
like,
open,
loves her.
skidding his way
The
down the hall
pieces.
and into the informal living room. I know what the two maps mean.
And they're gone.
To the empty room.
And they're gone.
Well,
Belladonna.
practically empty. Belladonna jumped down from the couch and walked over to the door leading to the kitchen. Hello, Celeste. His heart sank when no one answered. Where is everyone? Cal glanced down at the table and saw the two maps were still there. He grabbed them and ran out into the hall, checking all the rooms for the girls. They were nowhere to be found. His stomach clenched. Had the pirates broken in and taken all four of them? He checked the kitchen. The basement door stood open and the light was on. Belladonna sat in the doorway, flicking her tail. Had the girls gone in the basement for something? He ran down the stairs, Belladonna following at his heels. At the bottom of the steps, he looked to the left, his breath catching when he saw the cask with its false door hanging open. He ran over to the cask and stuck his head in the door, the smell of salt air telling him immediately that he'd found the passage to the maze. The light from the basement illuminated the tunnel for a few feet. The rest was darkness, except for the faint glow of a light up ahead. He patted his pocket, breathing a sigh of relief that he'd brought his small flashlight. It was obvious the girls had either been taken in here by the pirates or come on their own. Either way, he needed to find them. He darted into the passage and sprinted in the direction of the faint glow.
Oh my god, Cal, you are such a sweet man.
Chapter 29. 30 minutes until dead tide.
Oh shit. It's crunch time, y'all.
Luke had stopped the bayliner just shy of the cave entrance. The tide wasn't low enough yet for the big boat to fit inside. His fists clenched around the wheel, his knee jiggling up and down as he waited for Gordy to bring the inflatable, the only boat at his disposal that would allow them to follow the pirates into the cave. He couldn't wait for the tide to go out low enough to drive the bayliner in, and besides, he had no idea how small the passages would be inside. He silently cursed himself for not anticipating the pirates might use scuba gear to sneak in underwater instead of arriving by boat. He hoped the mistake wouldn't prove to be fatal. He cut the motor of the bayliner and dropped anchor. He'd have to leave the boat here while he, Buzz, and Gordy went in the raft. He double-checked to make sure he had his Glock and SOG seal knife. We should take this. Buzz held up the stainless steel scuba spear gun, and Luke nodded. They could use all the weapons they could get. The sound of a motor alerted him to the approaching inflatable, and he sat on the side of the boat, swinging his legs over so he could jump into the raft as soon as it came alongside. Buzz did the same, and when Gordy pulled up, they both jumped in, causing the boat to dip into the water, then bob back up. "Let's go. They have a good 5 minutes on us," Luke said. Gordy gunned the boat forward, and Luke picked up his infrared binoculars. "It looks like they've moved the boulders that were blocking the way when we were in here the other day." The missing boulders provided a small passageway for the craft, and they slid through them, following the underwater passage for several yards. The water was getting much lower now, and the passage much narrower. It was almost as if they were going uphill. Luke saw another passageway to the right up ahead. "Hold it up here," he said, and Gordy stopped the boat. Luke looked down the other passage. "Should we take it?" Gordy asked. Luke got out a flashlight and put it down near the surface of the water, aiming it sideways so it would reflect off the top. He saw a slight rainbow sheen. Gasoline. The pirates must have taken that passage. "Yep," he answered, and Gordy turned the inflatable into the passage and headed forward. As they powered along, Luke kept his
They
eye
have the right
out
map, so
on
yes,
the
follow
sides
them.
of the tunnel in case there were any more turnoffs. "Buzz, keep an eye out up ahead. Let me know if you see any sign of the pirates. I'll keep an eye out for turnoffs. I think we're in the maze, and I have no idea which way to go." "Holy crap, we're inside the maze," Jolene said, pointing to the carved stone walls which veered off at different angles. "Wait!" Celeste stopped short and spun around. "We need the map, or we won't know which path to take." Jolene grabbed her arm, stopping her from heading back. "No, we don't. I have a photographic memory, remember? I can picture the maze in my head, and I know exactly which way to go." Celeste's eyebrows raised. "Okay, then lead the way." "Hold on," Morgan said. Celeste turned to see her looking down at the burlap bag Fiona was holding. Inside, one of the crystals was glowing. Fiona opened the bag and pulled out an egg-sized pearly white stone, which was emitting a hazy white glow, almost matching the one on her pendant. "It's Moonstone, for good fortune and safe travel." She held it out in her palm. "Safe travel," Celeste's brow creased. "Bring it over to the left path here." Fiona moved to the left, and the glow diminished. The further she walked down that path, the dimmer it got, until finally the glow extinguished. She started back toward them, and the stone lit up again, getting even brighter as she walked down the path on the right. "Jolene, is that the path we should take?" "Yep," Jolene nodded. "Looks like the stone is showing us the way, too." They followed Fiona, getting about 50 feet down the path, when Celeste thought she heard something behind them. "Shh." She grabbed Fiona's arm, and they all stopped. "Footsteps coming behind us," Morgan said. Celeste instinctively got into her defensive karate stance, holding her arm with the cast in front of her, feeling glad she hadn't seen the doctor to have it removed. The hard shell of the cast would help protect her, and she could use it as a weapon. Was it the pirates coming after them? The steps were closing in. She held her breath when she saw a shadowy figure turn the corner. Then her breath whooshed out of her, and she relaxed when she realized who it was.
Cal!
"Cal, you scared the crap out of us." Morgan bent down to pet Belladonna, who purred up at her proudly, as if expecting to be rewarded for bringing Cal. "Thank God you guys are okay. I was afraid the pirates got you." Cal pulled Celeste into his arms, and her heart melted.
Aww.
Then he abruptly released her and held the maps out in front of him, holding his flashlight in his mouth
Finally,
to illuminate
think
them.
they're back to normal.
"I figured out how the maps work together," he said, except it came out all garbled. around the flashlight. How? Celeste asked, taking the flashlight out of his mouth and aiming it toward the maps. Remember how I told you that pirates used to set up booby traps to do away with other pirates that tried to steal their treasure? Like the one that exploded the cliff when the pirates captured me this summer? Morgan asked. Exactly, Cal said. The map Jolene found shows you how to navigate the maze, but the maze is booby-trapped. The leather map shows you where those booby traps are. That explains why the poem called it a treacherous maze, Morgan said. Celeste frowned at the maps. But how do you use them together? That's the tricky part. You overlay them, but our maps aren't drawn to the same scale, so you kind of have to wing it. Cal pointed to a round section in the middle of the leather map. See this part? The girls nodded. Well, it coincides with the very middle of the maze, here. He pointed to an open space in the center of the maze. So these X's on the leather map must be the booby-trapped spots. There's a lot of them in the middle, Celeste noticed. Right. I think that's where the treasure is, so it would make sense he'd have them there. But there's also some spots out here in the maze, so we need to be on the lookout for those and make sure we avoid them, whatever they are. Cal narrowed his eyes at Fiona, apparently noticing the moonstone for the first time. What's going on with that rock? It's showing us the way. Lights up when we are heading in the right direction, then fades if we make a wrong turn. Cal's eyebrows raised a fraction of an inch. Well, that's handy, he said matter-of-factly. Celeste figured he must be getting used to the sisters' strange powers.
Good.
So anyway,
She'll be
he
living
said,
with
turning
him
back to
forever,
the maps and pointing to
ever,
one section.
ever.
It looks like we are here on the maze map. If we follow the maze as the map indicates, I think we'll need to be careful here and here. The rest of the booby traps look like they are at the destination. What is the destination? Jolene asked. I don't know, but it looks like it must be huge, Celeste replied. I assumed it was the treasure, Morgan added. Well, heck, then let's get going, Jolene said, turning and starting to walk in the direction they had been going. We may still be able to beat the pirates there before they realize they have the wrong map and figure out the way to the treasure.
They have the right map.
They continued through the maze, the moonstone and Jolene's memories showing them the way. Celeste turned off the flashlight to conserve the battery, just in case. As they progressed, Celeste could feel it get damper, cooler, and saltier. They were nearing the ocean. Hold on. Cal held the maps out, and Celeste clicked on the flashlight and aimed it at them. If my theory is correct, there's a booby trap up here to the left. We better be careful. They all scooted to the right of the passage, and Celeste pointed the flashlight to the left side. She noticed even Belladonna was keeping to the right. The flashlight hit on a sandy patch of floor. There, Cal said. The sand? Jolene asked. Don't step near it. Cal picked up a stick that was lying on the side and poked it into the sand. It went in about a foot, then stood straight up and slowly sunk. Quicksand. Celeste's stomach crunched, thinking of what might have happened to them if Cal hadn't figured out the two maps. The area of sand looked just like any other patch of sand, and the passage was loaded with it. They could have walked right over it. They shuffled by it, each of them giving the area a wide berth. Belladonna trotted by with a quiet "Woo." A few more twists and turns, and Cal raised the alarm again. Watch out, up ahead, on the right. They cautiously approached, Celeste's heart skittering, when the flashlight revealed old, rusted animal traps set along the path. Easy to pick out with a flashlight, but for a pirate trying to navigate the dark passage in the 1700s, not so much. She looked nervously for Belladonna, but she needn't have worried. The cat was staying far away from them. They carefully set the traps to the side and continued on their way. After a few more minutes, the passage seemed to get wider and wider until they spilled out into a gigantic cavern. Fiona's crystal glowed like someone had plugged it in, illuminating the entire chamber. Celeste's heart forgot to beat as she looked around the chamber. Her mouth dropped open, and she glanced sideways at her sisters, each of whom wore expressions similar to hers. For once, the Blackmore sisters were all speechless. Chapter 30. Dead Tide. Is that what I think it is? Jolene asked, her eyes staring straight ahead. Yup, Celeste gulped. The passage had opened up to a giant cavern, a cavern big enough to hold a 300-year-old pirate galleon. Which it did. The Ocean's Revenge, Isaiah Blackmore's ship. Jolene pointed to the ship's name burned into the wood on the front, and Celeste felt an odd mixture of wonder and pride swell in her chest. The path had spilled them out just above the ship's deck. Below them, Celeste could see the bottom of the cavern was filled with about 20 feet of seawater that was rushing out rapidly. When dead tide hit, the bottom would be dry, offering easy access to the hold of the ship. And if what she could see on the deck of the ship was any indication, the whole thing was loaded with treasure. Looking across the cavern, she could see openings from other passageways. One was almost directly across from them. Another was to the right, and one level below. Celeste realized the maze must have more than one level. The ship was intact, almost perfectly preserved, if not a little weathered, from the centuries of being underwater. Jolene started off down the rocky slope that led to the ship, but Cal pulled her back. Hold on, this place is booby-trapped, remember? He held out the 2 maps. Let's figure out where the traps are, and then we can check out the ship. Celeste walked around to the other side of the maps, orienting herself so that the maps faced the same way as the cavern. This X right here looks like it's right in front of the ship, at the bow. Cal looked over at the ship. You're right. There's water there now, but we better be careful not to step there once it's out. No telling what Isaiah put there. And over here, to the right, Morgan pointed to an area of rock. Yes, and it looks like there is something over there and there. Cal pointed to spots on the map that looked like they were on either side of the ship, near the passage openings. And whatever you do, don't go near there. Cal pointed his chin to the right, where there was a tall outcropping of rock. Why? Jolene asked. Celeste stood on her tiptoes to get a better look. Is that an underground cliff? Yup, Cal said. And from the looks of it, it's pretty deep. You don't want to fall over that by mistake. Jolene shook her head, then returned to looking at the maps. That looks like all of the booby traps, right? Cal nodded. Near as I can tell. Good. Then, let's check it out. Jolene picked her way down the steep rubble trail, and everyone followed. The floor on this side of the cavern was higher than the rest, and a wooden plank spanned the space from one section of the trail to the deck of the ship. They crossed the plank, Celeste's stomach lurching as she looked at the icy water swirling below. The current was strong. If one of them fell in, they might be sucked out to sea. This is amazing. Morgan stood on the deck, looking up at the tall mast of the ship. She touched the age-old wood, closing her eyes and smiling. Celeste thought she saw a swirly mist start to form next to Morgan, but when she blinked, it was gone. I can't believe this thing has survived almost intact down here all these years. Celeste looked around at the wooden deck, brass ship's wheel, and hand-carved ornamentation near the front of the ship. She felt like she had been transported into the middle of an Indiana Jones movie. Jolene was already across the deck and into the opening to the ship's hold, which was practically glowing with gold and silver. Look at this. She held up a giant gold cross, embedded with emerald green stones that glinted in the light. Celeste watched her run her fingers through the booty that was piled up inside the ship, and realized it was loaded with jewelry, coins, and artifacts worth more money than they could ever spend. Looking around, she could see some of the treasure was strewn about the cavern, which also held old casks and wooden sea chests. She squatted down beside Jolene and stared at the treasure. How are we going to get this stuff out of here? You won't need to worry about that. Celeste jerked her head in the direction of the voice.
Oh,
Her
shit.
heartbeat pounding in her chest as she recognized the pirates from Skinner's house. They were standing in the opening of one of the passages across the cavern and to the right. One of them still had the jagged scar on the side of his face. The other wore a pirate-style black eye patch held across the eye that had been skewered by the shard from Fiona's necklace. She stood, frozen, staring at the pirates, wondering how they had found their way here with the wrong map. Jolene stood up, facing them with her hands on her hip. This treasure is ours. Back off. I don't think so, Missy. Scarface raised his gun, pointing it directly at Jolene, who barely even flinched. Celeste could see her sister's fists clenching and unclenching. She remembered the lightning-like energy she'd branded Scarface with. Wait, you idiot! Eye Patch put his palm on the top of the barrel of Scarface's gun. You can't shoot that in here. It could bring the whole cavern down on top of us. Scarface looked disappointed. Jolene looked triumphant. We'll just have to take them the old-fashioned way, then, Scarface growled.
Haha.
Celeste's stomach sank as 4 more pirates appeared behind him, and they started across the cavern toward them. Hold it, right there. The voice came from the left, a level higher than where Celeste was now. She swiveled her head in that direction.
Wait, is that
and
Luke?
relief swept over
It's
her when
Luke!
she saw Luke, Buzz, and Gordy.
Yes!
Unfortunately, Luke had captured the pirates' attention too. Eye Patch yelled, "Get them!" and changed course, rushing up the boulders on the side of the cavern to get to the flat mouth of the passage that Luke was standing in. They split up, with 2 of the new pirates following Eye Patch, and the other 2 following Scarface, who kept coming toward Jolene and Celeste.
Oh, please.
Celeste watched helplessly as the 3 pirates
I
rushed
love
Luke,
battle themes in these
Buzz,
books.
and Gordy. Eye Patch brandished a large oar, trying to jab and hit Luke. Luke had a knife out, but Eye Patch was keeping him from getting near with the long oar. The other 2 had engaged Buzz and Gordy in a fist fight, and the 4 of them were rolling around in the debris below the passage. It was impossible to tell who was winning. Celeste noticed the water was receding quickly. Scarface and his friends were sloshing their way toward the ship, the water now only waist deep. Over on the left, Luke was dodging Eye Patch's oar, unsuccessfully trying to grab for it. Celeste saw a white mist materialize behind him. She squinted at it. It was the pirate ghost. The ghost was gesturing.
Josiah Blackmore!
Old sea
Isaiah
chest
Blackmore.
that sat just
Isaiah
behind
Blackmore.
Luke. Was there something in there that could help them? Luke! She yelled across the cavern, pointing at the chest. The chest! Look in the chest! Luke risked a glance behind him and then pushed hard at Eye Patch, who lost his balance and fell back a few steps. Luke backed up, his attention still focused on Eye Patch, and flipped open the lid of the chest. Celeste saw his eyes widen as he quickly glanced back over his shoulder to look inside. Then he reached into the chest
Thanks, gal.
and came out with a long sword. Celeste watched in astonishment as he proceeded to wield the sword against Eye Patch's oar in a choreography that was reminiscent of an old-fashioned sword fight. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw one of the other pirates land a punishing blow to Gordy, who collapsed in a heap. She didn't have much time to feel bad for him, though, because Scarface and the two other pirates were getting close to the ship. Too close. She remembered the booby trap directly in front of the galleon. Could she lure them over there? Celeste ran to the front of the ship. A wooden plank hung out over the bow like a gangplank, and she jumped on top of it, ignoring her sister's pleas for her to stop. "You'll never take us or our treasure," she yelled, glaring down at Scarface and his companions. Arrgh! One of them surged forward toward the front of the ship.
Oh, this is gonna be fun. Okay, guys, you're gonna love this.
The ship was a good 20 feet above the ground, and the fastest route to her was to climb a rope that was dangling over the front. The pirate saw the rope and ran forward to grab it, stepping directly in front of the ship. But instead of his feet hitting the solid ground of the cavern floor, he slid into the swirling water. From her vantage point above on the ship, Celeste noticed it was swirling around in a circle. A whirlpool.
Ha!
The pirate screamed and flailed his arms up in the air. His body spun in the current as it disappeared quickly under the water. Scarface and the other pirate stopped in their tracks, watching as their cohort was sucked under into the icy, dark water. They quickly changed direction, heading to the side of the ship. Celeste noticed with a tinge of panic that, other than the whirlpool, only a trickle of water was left on the bottom of the cavern. It was dead tide, and soon the tide would start rushing in again. If they didn't hurry, they'd all be trapped in here, with all the exits underwater.
Not all of them.
Celeste stole a glance over at Gordy. He lay still on the rocks. The pirate who had knocked him out was making his way up to join Eye Patch in the sword fight. Buzz was holding his ground against the other pirate. "Luke!" Cal caught Luke's attention and pointed to Luke's right. Celeste knew he was trying to tell Luke a booby trap lay there, but would Luke know what he meant? Celeste ran off the ship and onto a large boulder so she could get a better look. She held her breath as Luke backed the pirates up, advancing slowly as he jabbed at them with the sword. His sword ripped the sleeve of Eye Patch, and Celeste saw a line of blood. "Bastard!" Eye Patch paused to look at his arm, which was a fatal mistake. Luke took the opportunity to ram the sword into his midsection, causing Eye Patch to stumble back into the other pirate. They both staggered backward a couple of feet, stopping abruptly as if stuck in mud. Celeste looked down at their feet. Not mud. Quicksand. They were wide-eyed with panic, as their attempts to pull their feet out only served to get them sucked in deeper. She watched them struggle as they sunk to their ankles, then their knees, then their waist.
Oh!
"Help us," Eye Patch pleaded, holding his arms out to Luke. But Luke was already rushing over to the passage opening he'd come in through. Celeste saw him pick up a spear gun and aim it in the direction of Buzz and the pirate he was still trying to fight off. He shot it, and the spear flew out. "Ah!" The pirate whipped around, grabbing for the spear as it connected with his shoulder blade. That gave Buzz the opening he needed to knock the pirate out cold. And then he headed in the direction of Gordy, presumably to pull him out of the way of the raising water. Celeste didn't have time to watch Gordy's rescue, though, because she was too busy watching Scarface's ugly mug appear over the side of the ship. "Look out!" she yelled to Jolene, who was still standing on the deck with Fiona. Below Fiona, the burlap bag glowed red. Belladonna sat beside the bag, pawing at it and meowing. "The bag!" Celeste pointed to the bag as Scarface pushed himself up on the end of the plank that hung over the front of the ship, a triumphant snarl on his face. Jolene bent down, opened the bag, and took out the glowing crystal. The crystal brightened when she touched it, arcing out energy in vibrant reds and oranges. Scarface lunged toward Jolene. Jolene hurled the crystal at him, sparks flying out of her hand as the glowing ball left it. Scarface stopped short, realizing the ball was coming straight for him. He tried to back up the plank, but the ball exploded in front of him, knocking him off the ship. Celeste heard his yell, and then the splash as he was swallowed by the whirlpool. Sparks from the crystal rained down on the ship like fireworks. No one spoke. What was there to say? Celeste saw Buzz and Luke wading through the water with Gordy's body. She hoped he wasn't dead. Had they killed all the pirates? Celeste did a mental head count. There was one pirate left. She scanned the cavern. Where was he? She got her answer seconds later, when she felt strong hands grab her around the waist and the cold steel of a blade press against her throat. "Get away from the treasure, or I'll kill her."
Which one?
Celeste's heart pounded against her ribs as the gravelly voice yelled against her ear.
Cass.
She saw the dawn in her sister's eyes as they turned toward her. Jolene glanced down at the crystals. None of them glowed. "Let her go." Jolene pushed her palm out toward the pirate, but nothing happened. Fiona started toward them, and the pirate jerked on Celeste's hair, pulling her head to the side and jabbing the pointy edge of the blade into her neck, just under her chin. Celeste flinched, and Fiona stopped. "What do you want?" Morgan asked. "All the treasure I can carry, and safe passage out of here, the way you came in." The pirate jerked his head toward the passage the girls had arrived through. Celeste cut her eyes toward the other side, where the pirates had come, and noticed it was already starting to fill with water. His exit route was probably cut off. She also saw Cal creeping toward them, and she tried to signal him to back off. She had a plan, and didn't want Cal getting hurt. "Okay, but let her go first," Morgan said. Celeste stayed very still, keeping in tune with the pirate's every breath, waiting for him to loosen his hold just a little. A white blur streaked from the side, distracting the pirate. Belladonna. The cat.
The
raked
damn
pirate's
cat,
arm
let's
with
go!
her claws. The pirate loosened his grip, and Celeste spun around, bringing her arm up, and smashed him over the head as hard as she could with her hard plaster cast.
Oh yeah, go girl.
He staggered backward, and Cal moved in, hitting him with an uppercut to the jaw. But the pirate was tough, and he punched out, connecting with Cal's cheek. Cal punched back, moving the pirate back a few steps. The pirate swung again, and Cal ducked low, then rushed into the pirate's midsection, pushing him backwards like a linebacker. Celeste's stomach clenched when she realized what Cal was doing. He was pushing the pirate toward the cliff, and at the speed he was going, it looked like Cal was going to go right over with him.
No.
"Cal, no!" she cried out, just as he disappeared over the edge.
Cal!
Celeste rushed to the edge of the cliff, her heart shattering into a million pieces. Tears sprang to her eyes as she
No.
leaned over.
Not Cal.
The surprise of her life. Cal wasn't crushed to the bottom, Actually, you couldn't even see the bottom, but that was okay, because Cal's hand was gripping onto a piece of rock that was sticking out about 6 inches
Help
long.
him up!
Cal, I thought you were dead.
Help
Yeah,
him up!
he grinned up at her. Grab onto my hand with your free hand. She shoved her good hand, the one without the cast, over the cliff. He grabbed it. His hand was slick with sweat, and her heart fluttered, half expecting it to slip out. In that moment, she knew that she didn't want to live without him.
Oh.
Cal, I love you,
Oh!
she blurted out.
Snap!
His blue eyes softened, and he smiled up at her.
Uh-huh.
I love you too, Celeste. They stared into each other's eyes.
Okay.
Celeste
Kiss
could feel his heart
after you get this man up, okay?
her chest filled with warmth, and then panic as she felt his hand slipping out of hers. No, she yelled as she tried to grab on, but his hand was too slick, his body weight too heavy. His hand slipped out of hers.
Luke,
as
come
she
on!
closed her eyes,
Where the hell is Jake?
sickening crunch. No crunch came. She opened her eyes and craned her neck farther over the edge. Cal was standing on a thin ledge, pressed against the wall of the cliff, his face about a foot down, looking up at her. You didn't fall to your death. I was standing on the ledge the whole time. Now, hurry up and help me out of here. She lay down on her stomach and put both hands over. Cal grabbed on, then wedged his foot into a crevice on the side of the cliff, pulling his way up like a mountain climber. They were both out of breath when he emerged over the top. He pulled her to her feet and pushed the hair back from her face.
Aww.
Did you mean what you said? He asked. What? That I love you?
Aww.
He nodded, his sapphire eyes drilling into hers. Well, after that stunt, I'm not so sure, she teased. Out of the corner of her eye, she could see her pirate ghost bobbing up and down, smiling and giving her the thumbs up. Say it, he said, his lips drifting awfully close to hers. I love you.
Aww.
His lips were warm, salty, and utterly delicious. As her eyes fluttered shut, she saw the pirate ghost blow her a kiss and disappear into a swirl of mist. Hey, you guys, hurry up. The tide is coming in. Morgan's frantic plea jerked Celeste out of the kiss, and she
Aww.
looked around. How had the water gotten so high so fast? She grabbed Cal's hand and sprinted over to where her sisters stood, gesturing for them to hurry. Luke and Buzz stood with Gordy in between them, a little bruised, but alive.
Oh, God.
We'll have to go out this way. Luke nodded toward the passage the girls had used. The way we came in is already getting flooded, and I'm not sure we can fit the boat through. Celeste looked over to the other side of the cavern and noticed the water was a lot higher on that side. She glanced at the ocean's revenge and saw the boat was quickly filling up with water. But what about the treasure? She asked. There's no time. Let's go. They ran up the slope and into the passage. Fiona held her crystal out, which lit the way. Buzz and Gordy raised their brows at it, but kept quiet. Celeste noticed the bottom of the passage was slick with puddles of water as they hurried through it. Her heart warmed by the fact that Cal kept hold of her hand.
Aww.
Belladonna paddled along behind them, making angry mewing noises every time her paws got wet. So, how do you guys figure the pirates knew their way through the maze? Jolene asked. We followed them in from the ocean, Luke said. I found this in the water, floating behind them. I guess they used it to find their way. Very convenient they dropped it, since it helped us find our way. He pulled out a map, almost identical to the maze map they had. Let me see that. Jolene stopped and stared at the map. This isn't the fake that we gave to Overton. What? It has to be, Morgan said. No, the path is actually the real path, the opposite of the fake map. Jolene turned to Cal. Do you still have that? Cal reached into his pocket and pulled out the map. Jolene held the two side by side. See? How is that possible? Fiona fixed. What is going on? There's only one way it's possible, Jolene chuckled. Overton was double-crossing Goldlinger. Right, Celeste said. He took our fake map and made his own fake map, which actually had the real path. Morgan's brow creased.
He's so dumb.
But what happened to Overton? Jolene shrugged.
Who cares?
Who cares? Maybe Goldlinger found out and did away with him? Fiona mused. Mew. Belladonna sounds like maybe she knows, Celeste joked. This is kind of depressing. We went to all this trouble, found the treasure, fought off the pirates, and we didn't even get to bring any of the treasure back, Fiona said. Speak for yourself. Jolene reached into the pocket of her cargo pants and pulled out a handful of gold chains and coins. You took some? Morgan asked as they rounded the last corner. The basement light shone through the cask door just ahead. Yeah, what do you think I was doing while you guys were screwing off with the pirates? Belladonna ran ahead, leaping out into the basement and up the steps. The rest of them dragged behind. Celeste felt exhausted as they mounted the stairs and spilled out into the kitchen.
Aww.
Jake came around the corner, creasing his forehead at them. Where were you guys? I looked all over. They looked at each other. No one knew exactly what to say. Jake narrowed his eyes. Did I miss something? It's past midnight, and I thought that was when everything was going to go down.
Oh, it did.
Fiona went over to him and put her arm around his waist. You could say that. Jake slipped his arm around her shoulders and looked at the basement door. Were you guys in the basement? Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know about anyone else, but I worked up quite an appetite down there, Jolene said. Let's fill Jake in while we eat that pizza. Celeste as Jolene glanced at the kitchen counters, then poked her head into the informal living room, then back into the kitchen. Cal, don't tell me you forgot to pick up the pizza.
He had an epiphany. Let it slide.
It's nice to sit and relax without having to worry about pirates. Jolene lifted her face to the sun, whose warm Indian summer rays had transformed the Maine fall weather back into summer. Celeste nodded, looking out over Perkins Cove where they sat at wrought iron tables outside their favorite ice cream place. The cove was calm, peaceful, a perfect fall day, which had tourists swarming in and out of the shops and taking pictures of themselves in front of the cove filled with quaint New England boats. She felt the corners of her mouth tug upwards in a smile, thinking of how surprised they might be to know that a 300-year-old pirate ship loaded with treasure was less than a mile away. You could say that again, Cal said, pulling out the chair next to Celeste and sitting a small cup of chocolate chip ice cream in front of her before sitting down. Celeste dug into the ice cream, which was no easy feat, considering Cal had intertwined his hand with hers and didn't seem eager to let go.
Aww.
Luckily, her cast had been removed a week ago, and she had more mobility in her free hand. I just wish we had taken more treasure out. It could be another 300 years before anyone can get down there again. Morgan bit into the side of her maple walnut cone with a crunch. Not necessarily, Jake said. Back in Isaiah's day, there wouldn't have been any way to navigate the maze underwater. But today, we have scuba gear and even submersibles that could go down there. I'd love to get a look at what's in there, Cal said. There must be some great antique jewelry and artifacts, priceless stuff. But really, the things you guys have in your attic will give you more money than you can ever spend. I still don't understand how Isaiah got the boat in there in the first place, Fiona said. When we were out on the ocean looking for the pirates, I could see the opening of the underwater cave above the sea line. I'm guessing he just sailed the boat in. 300 years ago, the sea level was actually a lot lower. So if they had an unusually low tide like this one, he would have been able to get the boat in pretty easily, Jake said. But how would he get it in through the maze? Jolene sipped her frappe, her blue eyes questioning Jake over the tops of her sunglasses. I think he might have built the maze later, as an added insurance against anyone else finding the ship. Celeste's eyebrows shot up. That seems like a pretty big task. Jake shrugged. Well, I'm not sure how he did it, but somehow he got that boat in there in the middle of the maze. And what about Overton? Cal asked. No one has seen him since last week, Jake answered. Celeste licked a glob of ice cream off her spoon. It had been a little over a week since they'd found the pirate ship, and no one had seen Overton since that day. She couldn't say she would miss him, but it did give her an eerie feeling, not knowing what happened to him. Well, I hope they get a nicer sheriff to replace him. It will be great not to be accused of every crime that happens in this town, Morgan said, shoving the end of her cone into her mouth. Do you think Goldlinger did away with him? Jolene asked. Jake shrugged. I'm not sure. His apartment was empty, and no one ever found his car. Maybe he's on the run. Either way, I'm happy to see him go. So, now what? Fiona asked. We go back to normal? Well, I'd hardly call you girls normal, Cal said, draping his arm over Celeste's chair. Right, we have some special talents that we can't ignore, Celeste said, as she squinted at the crowd. Was that who she thought it was? Yeah, we should work on harnessing them, I guess, Fiona said.
Mateo!
Especially Jolene. I don't even know where to start, Jolene said. Maybe you could help me, Celeste. Yeah, sure, Celeste answered her sister absently. She was distracted by the crowd, her eyes searching for a mop of familiar, dark, wavy hair she thought she'd seen. Maybe we could all get together once a week or something and... Celeste? Are you even listening?
No.
Jolene tapped Celeste on the shoulder. Celeste wasn't listening. She was busy staring into the crowd at Mateo. He stood about 50 feet away on the other side of the cove watching them. When he saw her look at him, he smiled, saluted her, and then turned away, disappearing into a throng of tourists who just disembarked from one of the open-air trolley-shaped buses that provided transportation around town. Hey, it's that guy. Jolene, who had swiveled her head to follow Celeste's gaze, shot out of her chair and took off running in Mateo's direction.
Hey, it's that guy again!
Celeste relaxed back in her seat. Somehow she knew Jolene would never catch up to him.
Never does.
Guy? Fiona scrunched her face at Celeste. Mateo. Oh, the mystery man who gave us the book? Fiona looked in the direction Jolene had taken off in. Why do you think he would show up here? Should we go after him?
No.
Celeste shrugged. Nah, he helped us out before, but if he wanted to talk to us, he would have come over. Besides, Morgan added, I have a feeling we might be seeing him again someday, when the time is right. Celeste watched Jolene come out of the crowd and jog back to the table. He got away. She collapsed in her seat, gulping in a few breaths. Never mind him, Morgan said. Luke called me last night, and he said his boss was asking a lot of questions about our, unusual talents. I guess word travels fast. I think I'd feel better if less people knew about that. Celeste cut her eyes over to Morgan. Me too, but they found out somehow and were intrigued. Speak of the devil. Jolene lifted her chin toward the street, and Celeste looked over her shoulder to see Luke approaching the table. He pulled a chair over next to Morgan, and everyone at the table exchanged a round of greetings. How was your trip? Cal asked. Pretty good. How have things been here? Blissfully quiet, Celeste answered. Almost too quiet, Jolene said. It's getting kind of boring. Oh, really? Luke leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms against his chest and smiling. So, you girls are looking to spice things up? Celeste narrowed her eyes. Was she? The truth was, after all the excitement, it was getting kind of boring. Maybe she was getting addicted to danger. She looked around at her sisters and got the distinct impression they felt the same way. Jolene answered for all of them. Yes, we are. Great. Luke leaned his forearms on the table, his eyes sparkling. How do you guys feel about ghost towns in the Old West? I have a job out there, and I sure could use your help. The end.
Damn it.
This has been
Damn
Dead
it.
Tide.
That was a little
By
avalanche.
Leanne Dobbs. Narrated by Hollis McCarthy. Produced by StarCloud Audio. Copyright 2013 by Lee Dobbins. Production copyright 2014 by Lee Dobbins.
So y'all, this was a exciting book. So now we know Cal and Celeste are together, like, yay! Like, took 2 whole books for that to happen. Okay, so here's why I say this. Because in Dead and Buried, like, Cal was, like, practically in love with Celeste. And in this book, he's like, oh, I'm gonna cancel this date because I'd rather have Celeste and instead of this girl, you know, kind of stuff. And then Celeste is like, oh my god, he's so dreamy. I can't believe I haven't noticed this yet. And then, like, scared that she could have lost Cal. It was insane, guys. It was insane. I'm so excited for you guys to listen to Buried Secrets, because, hold up, I'm going to tell you how long that book is, okay? It's probably shorter than this one, so I'm going to check. Let's see, Buried Secrets, our next book. 4.5 hours, y'all. So we're not going to sit through the entire book. It's probably going to be more like 2 hours and 15 minutes, like a two-parter, almost, depending on how long the chapters are. So yeah, Buried Secrets is another Celeste book. Surprisingly. Maybe because the Cal thing, I'm sorry, but the Cal thing is like, oh. But it's just like, I don't know, it's just like, maybe it's because the Cal thing's just like really interesting. I hope you guys like this book. Dead Tide is finished. Dead Tide is finished, y'all. Thank y'all for watching, and I will see you in Buried Secrets. Bye.